This is episode number 14 with Brian St. Pierre.
There are some fundamental dietary principles that can be applied across virtually all successful eating approaches, whether it be vegan or keto or paleo or Mediterranean. We help them use their preferred style of eating and to do it better and to do it well. And we try to fit the program to the client rather than the client to the program.
Welcome to the Anchors of Health podcast, where it's all about interviewing the most brilliant minds under any of the four essential anchors of health, which is mindset, nutrition, movement, and recovery. I can't wait for you to listen to this episode because I have on the Director of Performance Nutrition at Precision Nutrition, which is the home of the world's top nutrition coaches. It's been the go-to source in the fitness industry for a very long time, and that's why fitness experts, health professionals, and superstar athletes all come to them for advice. Over the last 12 plus years, through their men's and women's coaching programs, their in-house coaches have helped nearly 50,000 men and women lose over 1 million pounds of body fat and lead healthier lives. Amazing. My guest, Brian, is renowned for his expertise in performance nutrition. He's a registered dietitian with a master's in food science and human nutrition and a long list of credentials and publications, including 5 books. Pro sport organizations like the San Antonio Spurs and Cleveland Browns trust him for his nutrition consultation. But first and foremost, Brian is a precision nutrition coach, helping people and fitness pros of all ages and backgrounds achieve their goals and feel great. So in this episode, you'll discover what makes precision nutrition more effective than all the other nutritional approaches that are out there today, what the fundamental principles of nutrition are that can be applied to any dietary approach that you're using. You're going to learn where to start and what skills to layer on next. Key strategies to help you stay more consistent, the pros and cons of being on low carb and who it's for, strategies on meal prep. I know a lot of you out there are very busy, so you're going to want to listen to that one. All the various ways to track progress beyond just looking at the scale. If he had to recommend general health supplements, which ones he'd pick, what all of Precision Nutrition's most successful clients have in common, and so much more. I suggest you take notes on this one because there's so much practical advice you can use right away. Or you can just check out the show notes page at anchorsofhealth.com/14. I have timestamp notes there. Also, if you want my key takeaways from every episode, just head over to anchorsofhealth.com and sign up for my exclusive email list. So let's just jump right in. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Brian. Brian St. Pierre, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Bill. Glad to be here.
It's an honor to have you on the show, and I'm so excited that you're here today because I've been learning from Precision Nutrition since the early days, which eventually led me to getting level 1 certified back in 2012. Back then there was nothing like it, and today, there's still nothing like it, so it's no surprise when I hear that Precision Nutrition is the largest and most respected private nutrition coaching and education company in the world. So let's start with this. What makes Precision Nutrition different or more effective than all the other nutritional approaches that are out there today? Other than the fact that you're the Director of Performance Nutrition there.
Yes, other than that fact, obviously. No, I think what sets us apart is we focus so heavily on nutrition coaching, like the actual art and science of coaching, in addition to like learning about nutrition and food. So once you've worked with enough people, you quickly start to realize as a coach that it's not, you can know all the nutrition physiology in the world and know all about macros and have a preferred eating style. Those things don't matter as much if you can't communicate well with your clients and get them to buy into things or help them to come up with their own solutions to issues. So one of the things I think that sets us apart and that we do really well is we teach other people, other fitness professionals, for example, how to become better coaches. And we're constantly working on our own coaching skills and how can we utilize that in our own coaching programs through the program itself, as well as helping our coaches get better and better at actual interaction, right? It's one of the things we know, like even just through the therapy world, is the vast majority of the benefits of the work with a therapist comes from the relationship between the therapist and the patient, not which method that they're using, not which school they went to, right? Those things are all helpful. But what's most important is what's called the therapeutic alliance. So basically the rapport, the relationship between the patient and the therapist. And so obviously we're not therapists. We don't teach people how to do therapy, but the same approach applies. So building a strong relationship, developing better communication skills, learning how to ask better questions to then lead to better next actions. Those are all things I think that help separate us from a coaching perspective as well as from a teaching perspective.
That's fantastic. And that's a loaded question that tells us a lot. And you might have already answered it already, but is there anything that you'd like to add in terms of giving us this broad overview on the overall philosophy of precision nutrition?
Yeah, one of the things in the nutrition field, what also sets us apart is we're not teaching or peddling one particular dietary strategy, right? Whatever the popular approach of the day might be, whether it's paleo or keto or you name it, we don't subscribe to nor prescribe or suggest even following one particular dietary strategy. We're what we would call nutrition agnostics. Because all of those approaches can be valid depending on the person, right? So what their goals are, what their activity type is, what their food preferences are. There are some fundamental dietary principles that can be applied across virtually all successful eating approaches, whether it be vegan or keto or paleo or Mediterranean. They all might seem really, really different. But in reality, there are dots that kind of connect them all, fundamental principles that make them all effective. And those are the things that we teach people so that they can then apply those principles to whatever dietary strategy they prefer, be it keto or paleo, Mediterranean, vegan, what have you. So we don't try to enforce, one style upon anybody. We help them use their preferred style of eating and to do it better and to do it well. So I think that's one of the things that sets us apart as well in that regard is a lot of nutrition experts have like a preferred eating style, intermittent fasting, whatever the case might be, that they try to get every single client they have to utilize. And what you find when you work with enough people, again, is that there is no one universal approach. You can't shoehorn everybody into one style. Even if it worked really well for you or it works really well for a chunk of your clients, it's never going to work for everybody because we all have different life circumstances, food preferences, schedules, you name it. And so I think that's a key piece that sets us apart as well, is we try to fit the program to the client rather than the client to the program.
And you bring up a good point because there's so many diets out there and you have all these nutrition camps that are battling on who's the best. And, that leaves the consumer, that leaves the person confused, right? There's research studies coming out every day. There's headlines that they're reading. There's a friend telling them that there's a new fad diet that they're on and, you got to try this. So what are some solid strategies for making sense of it all?
Well, I think there are quite a few things, right? So one of the first things that we teach in our own coaching practice, in our own coaching program, is to start to tune into your own internal hunger and appetite cues, right? For the most part, especially in Western culture, where we eat for all kinds of reasons besides hunger, right? We go to all-you-can-eat buffets, we pile food on our plate, we go to mom's house or grandma's house, and food is being kind of pressured upon us sometimes. You name the environment. You go to a work meeting, there's food, right? You go to a kid's birthday party, there's pizza and there's cake and there's ice cream. There's food in all of these scenarios. And it's one of the things that we teach our clients is to now start to learn to pay attention to, okay, make sure you try to eat when you're actually hungry, not just because it's time or because there's a circumstance or you're eating out of boredom or stress, right? So we learn to eat when hungry. And if you do eat for other times, that can be okay too, but doing it as a conscious choice. And then learning to eat and stop once you're satisfied, as opposed to just mindlessly eating whatever's in front of you, regardless of how full you actually are. And there are things you can do to make that easier, right? Using smaller plates, because that can change your perception. But the biggest piece is just paying attention, right? Eating slower, drinking some water. So we teach appetite and hunger awareness as one of the very first things. Learning to slow down, pay attention, eat mindfully, even if you're not changing what you're eating. Just building this awareness actually often causes people to change what they're eating. But it gets them to also just pay attention and become more aware of their intake. So that'd be the first step. And then from there we work on, some of the fundamentals of just general food in general. So making sure you get adequate protein, right? We teach using your hands to ballpark your portion sizes because for a couple of reasons. One, your hands are portable. They go with you wherever you go. You're at mom's house, you're at a work conference, you're eating at home, it doesn't matter. You can use your hand to ballpark portions. right? They're generally scaled to the individual. The bigger you are, the bigger your hands tend to be, and the more food you tend to need. So that works out nicely, and vice versa. The smaller you are, the less food you tend to need, the smaller your hands tend to be, and so you get less food that way as well. And then thirdly, it does kind of like that macro and calorie math for you. It helps you get adequate protein, carbs, and fats and calories without having to do a lot of high-level math just to eat lunch. And so we teach the hands. We usually start with protein because protein is the most effective and in many ways most important macronutrient in terms of keeping you full, right? It's the most effective for satisfaction, for helping you burn more calories, helping you keep your muscle mass or build more muscle mass, right? Helps your performance. So protein is super important. So we teach about 4 to 6 palms of protein a day for women and about 6 to 8 palm-sized portions of protein a day for men, or about 1 to 2 each meal, in that ballpark. We teach fists for vegetables. So again, about 4 to 6 fist-sized portions of vegetables a day for women and about 6 to 8 for men. Then we work on carbohydrates, getting quality carbohydrates, your potatoes and sweet potatoes, whole grains, beans and legumes, and of course fruit. And we teach cupped handfuls. So in this case, it would be about 6 to 8 cupped handfuls per day of carbohydrates for men and about 4 to 6 cupped handfuls for women. And then we use thumbs, like your entire thumb, for healthy fats. This would be things like oils, like your olive oil, your avocado oil, your coconut oil, things like avocados itself, nuts and seeds, a little butter and a little bit of dark chocolate, those kind of things. And so it would be about 6 to 8 thumb-sized portions of those healthy fats per day for men and about 4 to 6 for women. So those are the general principles we teach. So really it'd be like the hands, the awareness, the exact number of portions. Those are just a framework, a guideline to get people started, but you would adjust based on your own personal needs. Maybe you like more carbs and less fats. Maybe you like more fats and less carbs. That's cool. You can still use your hands to gauge those portions, and you just trade off some carb portions for some fat portions. Maybe you're a smaller individual and you only need, if you're a female, like 3 palms of protein a day because you're, let's say, 105 pounds, or you're a smaller male and you only need about 5 palms of protein a day. That's cool. It's not like those 6 to 8 or 4 to 6 are hard and fast rules. That's why when I say fundamental principles, I'm just talking about getting in a nice mix of proteins, veggies, carbs, and fats. The exact amount can be shaped by size, activity, personal preference, and goals. So those are just the initial framework, and then we can help people dial in their particular amounts, based on all those factors I outlined.
And what does that look like in terms of a breakdown of meals per day? Is that like a breakfast, lunch, dinner? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's ultimately that's kind of up to the individual. I would say as a general recommendation, we probably recommend or suggest people aim to eat about 4 times per day, because in our experience that tends to be like you're eating often enough where you're never going so long where you get really hungry between meals, but you're not eating so frequently that your meals are small and you're never quite satisfied and you're always kind of thinking about food. And you don't have to make 6 or 8 meals a day, right? You don't have to be cleaning up after 6 or 8 meals a day. So generally 4 is like our middle of the road starting point. But if you're someone who likes and does well with 3 squares a day, that's cool. If you prefer eating 6 small meals throughout the day and that works for your appetite and your schedule, that's fine too. What's most important are those totals at the end of the day, kind of like I outlined, finding those totals that work best for you. The exact frequency that you eat is really much more about personal preference than anything else. So whether it's 2 big meals a day or 6 small meals a day or anything in between, that's okay, so long as you can do it sanely. And you can reach your total goals for the day in a relatively painless way for you.
So this awareness of eating mindfully, thinking about how much you're eating. So this must be really effective if you have this as one of the first steps that you have your clients take. Can you talk about the effectiveness of this with your clients?
Oh, absolutely. It's actually the very first true habit we have folks work on in our own coaching program. Are the power of awareness, is that skill of hunger and appetite awareness, which we break down into 2 habits. So you practice just eating slowly for a couple of weeks, and then you practice eating until satisfied but not stuffed, or eating to about 80% full for a couple more weeks. And the reason we do this is because, one, yes, it's incredibly effective, because no matter what dietary approach you're using, whether it's, like I said before, vegan or keto or whatever the case might be, it's super important and helpful to become just more aware, not like obsessive about your intake, but just more aware and mindful. Because we know, look at the research, this consistently creates change in and of itself. Just becoming more aware of your intake, you're like, oh, wow, I've been eating French fries 6 days a week, and I would have guessed it was just 3. Right? There's all kinds of little things like that. That it can be so easy for food choices to become on autopilot, where you don't even recall what you ate or when you ate it. So just creating this awareness and having to pay more attention and slow down helps people to recognize, you know what? I've eaten enough of this, whatever X meal it is, or I've eaten a few bites of dessert and I'm satisfied. I actually don't need to eat the whole thing right now because this made me feel good right here. And stopping right here, I feel really good. I'm very satisfied. Kind of, sated my sweet tooth and I've eaten enough, and then I can save some for another time. So in our experience, that's our very first skill and our very first few habits to work on, because it leads to successful long-term outcomes, right? Even after you've completed the program, oftentimes people might do 30-day challenges or 6-week challenges, right? And so you get really good at losing weight over this short period of time, but all of a sudden that time period ends and it's like, well, now what? I don't want to keep crushing myself and following this program. What do I transition to? The beautiful thing about starting with that approach is it gives you a flexible approach to transition to no matter what, because it's a skill you've already built and can carry with you no matter how life circumstances change. You can use it when food sources available aren't great. You go to a social function and there's nothing truly quote unquote healthy to eat. That's okay. You just eat a few things, you eat them slowly and mindfully, and you stop once you're satisfied, and you're going to mitigate any potential kind of damage from whatever the case might be. So it's one of those things that's what we call our anchor habits. You can use them anytime, anywhere, with any approach, and they can be incredibly helpful because they're applicable across any dietary style.
And do you find that people don't need to get more complex than that? They just work on those 2 habits and then they're good?
Not quite. Not quite. I mean, those are really powerful, but they're not complete on their own, because you could eat slowly and mindfully and stop when satisfied and just eat carbs, right? Or just eat fats, but not get adequate protein or not get adequate vegetables. So I think there's still value in understanding a bit more about food. I think sometimes people think you need to become like this new dietary expert, and that's not the case. You just need to know some of the fundamental underpinnings of good nutrition. And so, like I said before, it's just getting adequate protein, adequate veggies, healthy fats, and carbs. It doesn't need to be anything super intense, but it's just becoming more aware and making sure you're getting in enough protein to meet your needs, which for most moderately active, like I said before, most moderately active women is about 4 to 6 palms a day, and most moderately active men is 6 to 8, right? And then so on with the other macronutrients. So I think the very first that hunger and appetite awareness skill is incredibly powerful, but by itself, it's an incomplete approach. It needs just a little bit more to help flesh it out, so people can do a better job or have a more confidence in terms of putting food on their plate and know the quality and the quantity rather than just eating it mindfully.
And so one of the other early principles that you have is, I guess, the why are you eating, right? It's the are you hungry? Are you bored? Stress? Following peer pressure? And this is actually one that my wife struggles with. She'll be at work and there's tons of snacks that's hard to avoid, or, after putting the kids down at night, she'll want to snack at nighttime. Mm-hmm. What are some strategies that people can use to minimize that trigger?
One of the things that we teach is this strategy or this skill of what we call notice and name, right? So if you find yourself, you put the kids down to bed, you've had a long day, and you find yourself wanting to have a little extra chocolate or an extra glass of wine or whatever your indulgence might be, point it out to yourself, right? Just say, okay, it's not judging, it's just noticing the craving, noticing the urge, naming it. I really want this extra chocolate because I had a stressful day and I know it'll make me feel better. And then kind of reevaluate, or you think it'll make you feel better, and then evaluate it logically. Like, will having this chocolate truly make me feel better? If yes, eat it. Just eat it slowly and mindfully until satisfied. If no, it's just a temporary salve, right, to help me cope with the day. Is there something else I could do that would also make me feel better? That doesn't include calories or have other unintended consequences, right? Perhaps that's foam rolling. Perhaps it's watching 20 minutes of escapist television on Hulu or Netflix, right? So just turning off your brain for a little while. Perhaps it's meditating for 5, 10, or 15 minutes, reading a good book. I mean, there could be many other options that could still make you feel better, but not necessarily have those unintended consequences of extra calories. Sometimes there's nothing wrong with giving into that indulgence and using it as a temporary solution, so long as it's not your only solution, or not an everyday solution, because then that solution ends up bringing upon its own problems eventually. And so I think it's important to, when you do it, just point it out to yourself, call it out for what it is, and then make an informed decision. I'm going to do this, and I'm okay with the fact that it'll mean I kind of overate for the day, but I also recognize it's just one day, and that's not going to make or break me. Or you notice, okay, this isn't going to be ideal for me. What I'm going to do right now instead is I'm going to go read that book I've been working on that I haven't read in a few days because the kids have been going to bed late or whatever the case might be. And that book will help me feel better without resorting to wine or chocolate or whatever the case might be. So there can be many different strategies, but I think first and foremost is just pointing it out to yourself, calling it out, and then making an informed decision if doing whatever you were craving will actually make you feel better, or if there's another thing with that doesn't involve food that could make you feel better, that would have other beneficial effects as well.
Now, another key principle is, what are you eating, right? So what do you recommend in this area?
I mean, there are many options, right? So let's start with like the proteins, for example. We generally recommend people aim for mostly lean proteins. So you're looking at things like chicken, like poultry, chicken and turkey, things like lean pork, fish, lean red meat. But it's okay to also have some, moderately fatty protein sources as well. So you're looking at things like salmon or chicken thighs or some sirloin, things along those lines, eggs, right? Some cottage cheese or some Greek yogurt with some fat involved. So I think there are many different options for protein sources. So long, generally speaking, you're looking for foods that are minimally processed and that are mostly whole foods. So mostly lean proteins that are minimally processed, and then the same thing with vegetables, right? So for vegetables, there's virtually any vegetable you want. I would say generally sticking to fresh or frozen. Some canned can be okay sometimes, but probably not like necessarily your go-to. But you can roast them, you can saute them, you can eat them in salads. There are many different options there.
So all these principles you mentioned are really great, but actually doing it is a struggle for many people. So is there anything that you found, like a common strategy that's been very effective across the board for people, or is it just really, really on an individual basis?
It's a bit of both. I mean, I think what helps is having a coach, having someone who can help you be accountable to yourself, but also just help you problem solve when things get sticky. Or sometimes it's just a matter of recognizing when you're doing things really well. Oftentimes as humans, it's easy to overlook the things we're doing well and hyper-focus on the things that we're struggling at. We expect ourselves to be 100% perfect, and that's just not reality. And in fact, in my experience, people who strive for perfection often end up worse for wear than people who aim for just good enough. And so one of the things I think that is most helpful for clients is to try to find a way to get out of that all or none mindset. It's one of the things we really try to coach over the year in our coaching program, is to get people out of that, I'm either on my diet or off my diet. In reality, I mean, if you're following those principles like I outlined, let's say like 80% of the time, that's going to be good enough for most people. If your goals become more advanced, and as you become more advanced, you want to increase that consistency, 90%, that's going to help you reach those goals. But to just be fitter, healthier, feel better, look better, perform better, 80% of the time, if you can do those things, that's all you need to make solid progress. And like I said, if you want to tighten things up and you want to get leaner and more muscular and ramp up your performance even more, sure, you can take it up to like 90%. But for most people, most of the time, there's no extra benefit to hitting those targets 100% of the time versus 80 or 90, because there's a point of diminishing returns. And because it becomes harder and harder to do, then people feel guilty when they can't do it, and there's backsliding. So one of the things we really try to teach people is to get out of that cycle where it's like perfection, and you slip and you feel guilty about it. Then you end up overeating to make yourself feel better about the guilt, and then the whole process starts over again. Whereas instead, it's recognizing everyone's going to have good days and bad days. No one day is going to make or break you. If you have a rough day, no big deal. Get up the next day, clean the slate, and just get back to your regular intake, and then go from there, because no one day is going to set you back by a significant amount. So I think it's really important to have like a growth or open mindset when you're going into it, and not expect perfection out of yourself, because perfection, one, isn't going to get you better results, and two, makes it impossible to stick to it long term. So aim for that 80 to 90% of the time thing, and then give yourself some intentional built-in flexibility where you can have a little bit of that chocolate and wine and cookies or whatever your preferred indulgence is, and not feel guilty about it because you know it fits into that 10 or 20% and it's not setting you back in any way.
Right. Yeah, that mindset piece is critical. So thanks for sharing that. Now, Brian, when people are thinking about losing a few pounds, the majority of response you'll get is cut back on the carbs. Mm-hmm. And you wrote this fantastic article on precision nutrition called Carb Controversy, Why Low Carb Diets Have Got It All Wrong. And I'll put that in the show note links. But it's probably the best article I've read on the topic of carbohydrates. Can you help us to make sense of this whole carb controversy?
It's a great question, and it's a loaded topic. First and foremost, I will point out that, as the author, I did not come up with a title. All right, that was come up with by my editors, because there is a time and a place for a low carb approach. Some people do really well with low carb. The problem is when people think low carb is like a universal solution, because it's not right for everybody. Not everyone can stick to it or enjoys eating few carbohydrates long term. And if you don't enjoy what you're doing long term, you're not going to stick to it long term. And then there can be actually some physiological downsides, right? We know that thyroid function can decrease a little bit. Cortisol levels can go up a little bit. So these things can add up that ultimately make it harder to stick to and harder to get results with. So generally speaking, in my experience, most people do well in that middle of the road, like I talked about, where I had pretty even portions of the proteins, the carbs, the veggies, and the fats, because it's a nice moderate intake that allows you to have a lot of flexibility. You want to have some toast with breakfast and a sandwich at lunch and some potatoes at dinner. You can do that and it all fits in. But on the flip side, some people do really well. They feel better, they perform better, and they enjoy eating more high-fat foods and less carb-rich foods, and there's nothing wrong with that. Right? And then conversely, there are people who enjoy the opposite. They like having more carbs, less fats, and they feel better and perform better and look better. So generally speaking, I think the issue really comes from people expecting cutting carbs to be this magic weight loss pill, and it's not. I mean, you might lose some initial weight, but usually it's just a loss of water weight. There's no evidence to suggest that cutting carbs long term leads to more fat loss. Right? I think that's the difference. There is some evidence to suggest, of course, that you'll lose more weight in the beginning, but that's mostly just water because you're losing glycogen. And when you lose glycogen, you lose water weight. That has nothing to do with your body fat. You're not actually losing any extra body fat. So that's true on the whole. But on an individual basis, I think that's where people are going to find out what works for them. So we suggest starting in that nice middle of the road, getting a good feel for those principles, getting a good feel and a consistent amount of intake of the proteins and the veggies and carbs and fats, and eating them slowly and mindfully. Then once you do that and you want to start playing with things a little bit, okay, I've been doing this and it's working pretty well, but man, I really just love avocado and I love, dark chocolate and I love nuts. But I don't really love eating a lot of grains. I don't feel my best when I eat a lot of potatoes, whatever the case might be. Okay, so you want to exchange some fat portions for some carb portions? That's cool. Go ahead and try it and see how it goes. So I think it's one of those things where what's most important is getting consistent general principles down first, and then you can play with and adjust the approach and see what works best for you and your personal preferences.
So I also have a lot of busy moms and dads that are struggling with meal prep. Mm-hmm. So they want to cook, but the time it takes to shop, prep, and clean up seem endless. So what can you recommend here?
Yeah, I mean, this is a common problem a lot of us face, right? I work full time. My wife owns her own business. I have 3 young kids. I can commiserate. I understand the time challenges and the allure of convenient things. But there are a lot of strategies you can implement to help make meal prep a lot easier. Because we do know that when you prep and pack your own food, or the majority of it, you're going to be much more consistent with your intake because you're not making decisions on the fly. When we're making food decisions on the fly, that's when we tend to eat foods in amounts we wouldn't normally do. So in terms of prepping, I mean, there are many different things you can approach. So a lot of people like to do a lot of food prep on Sunday. That's a great option where you're cooking up some chicken, you're chopping some vegetables, so you have things ready as the week goes on. Other folks like to do extra cooking at dinner, so they make big batches of dinner, so they always have leftovers for lunch the next day. That can be a really valid option. You can make like a super shake every day, which is using those same hand-sized portions I taught, but now you're going to use them in like an actual big shake. So like some protein powder, some veggies, usually spinach works really well. Throw a couple cupped handfuls of like frozen fruit in there, and some nuts or some healthy fats with fluid of choice, maybe some milk or some water, some almond milk, something along those lines. And you can blend that up before going to work, and that can be a great breakfast, or it can be a good mid-morning snack. So there can be lots of different things. Lots of different tactics that you can implement, and you can use bits and pieces to kind of put all those things together, right? And in terms of dinner, same kind of idea. You can use crock-pot meals, set something up the night before or that morning, so it's just kind of cooking slowly all day. And you come home to a nice chili or a stew, anything along those lines, and you've got yourself a nice dinner, and you made a big batch so you have leftover chili or stew for the next day for lunch. So there are many different ways you can go about it. There's no one set way. It's about finding, using those different strategies and tactics that work best for your strategy, that work best for your lifestyle, whether that be doing a lot of food prep on Sunday or a mix of some stuff on Sunday or whatever day of the week works best for you, with some mornings or maybe it's some nights. It's just a matter of finding little pieces like that can help you more consistently pack and prep food. And you can do it in bulk, so you're kind of knocking off many meals at once. And we actually even have an infographic. I don't remember what it's called off the top of my head. If you Google like precision nutrition and food prep, meal planning, something along those lines.
I have seen that one.
Drawing a blank.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic infographic that outlines a lot of these strategies in a nice visual way to help people with those exact needs. And that can be really, really helpful and a great resource to refer back to for morning strategies, nighttime strategies, weekend strategies, you name it. It's got lots of tips, lots of helpful guidelines on helping people get over that hump, that big challenge of how do I have time to prep healthy meals when I've got so much other stuff going on in my life, which we get, right? You're not eating better for the sake of eating better. You're eating better to help you live a better life. So there are lots of things you can do to make that a reality.
Okay, yeah, I'll find that one and I'll put it in the show notes for sure.
Yeah, perfect.
So I want to switch gears to tracking progress. So a lot of people get discouraged when they start to make these small changes and things aren't working as fast as they'd like, or maybe they think that they aren't seeing improvements at all. What do you recommend in terms of managing realistic expectations, and what are some of the ways that people can track their progress?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the first thing is knowing what are realistic expectations, right? Like what is a realistic rate of progress? And I think oftentimes our expectations are skewed because we've seen shows like The Biggest Loser, or we see bodybuilding magazines or Instagram stars who claim to gain 30 pounds of muscle in a year. And oftentimes those things are only possible if you have some chemical assistance, if you know what I mean.
Right.
Or if you're on The Biggest Loser, it's because you're not working, you're not taking care of your family. Your whole life is devoted to this one goal, right? Where you're exercising 4 to 6 hours a day. Like those things aren't the reality for the vast majority of us, right?
Yep.
Where we're exercising 45 minutes a day and scrambling to prep some healthy meals for our family to eat. No one's cooking them for us. So I think what's important is to recognize, what are realistic rates of progress. In general, I would say losing about 0.5 to 1% of your body weight per week. For most, this translates to about 1 to 2 pounds per week. But if you're a smaller person, it might be a little bit less. If you're a larger person, it might be a little bit more. So I like that percentage outlook, 0.5 to 1% of your body weight per week. And if you're trying to gain muscle, that depends on how long you've been lifting. But generally, I would say for people relatively new or who have taken a long time off and come back, about 1 to 1.5% of your body weight per month. If you're more advanced, about half of that, about 0.5 to 0.75% of your body weight per month. So it generally slows down as you become more advanced when it comes to weightlifting. And as you get leaner, things slow down as well, towards the lower end of that 0.5 to 1%. Sometimes even a little bit less, depending on how lean you're getting. So first, having a good idea of what realistic rates of progress are. Oftentimes, we've had clients who are like, I've lost 15 pounds in the first, 6 weeks or 10 weeks, and I feel like I'm not making progress fast enough. It's like, man, if you extrapolate that out for a year, right, 15 pounds over 10 weeks, that would be 75 pounds over the course of a year. That's unbelievable progress, right? But it can be so hard to take a step back and see that when you're in the weeds of it every single day. So understanding what realistic rates are. And then in terms of measuring progress, there are tons of ways. When it comes to actual weight loss, of course, there's the scale. But the scale is not fully reflective of everything that's changing, right? You could have built 3 pounds of muscle and lost 5 pounds of fat over the course of 5 weeks, which is unbelievable progress. But the scale is only going to show 2 pounds of weight loss. But in reality, you've improved your body composition substantially. You're probably stronger. You're feeling better. You have more energy. But the scale's not reflecting that very well. So the scale is not always your best resource when it comes to measuring progress, but it is one data point. We also recommend people take photos like once a month to kind of see. Oftentimes photos can give you a really good idea, like, wow, I can start to see some changes in my back musculature, or from the side I look leaner, right? I'm starting to notice some definition in my arms I had never seen before, even if the scale isn't reflecting all the changes. So photos, body measurements, like a tape measure around like your arm, your thigh, your waist, your chest, around your shoulders, all these different areas. So you can track, again, trends over time. Because oftentimes you can see, let's say it's a male, and your arms haven't gotten any smaller, but your waist has gotten smaller. So you've lost some body fat in your waist, or maybe your thighs have even gotten a little bit bigger. You've probably built some muscle in your legs and lost some size in your waist. You probably lost some body fat, which can be indicative of some nice progress, again, even if the scale doesn't show it. And then obviously there are many other subjective ways of tracking progress. How's your energy level when you wake up in the morning, right? How do you feel throughout the day? You're still getting the same energy level crash in the afternoon. Are your health markers improving? Have you had your blood lipids tested? Blood sugar, how's that looking? Blood pressure. There's many other ways of checking things. I've been sleeping better. My performance in the gym is improved. So there are many, many things you can track. And I find it's often really helpful for most people to track other areas of progress besides just weight. Because the weight doesn't always, weight loss doesn't happen linearly. Oftentimes it comes in fits and spurts, right? Man, you lose 3 pounds one week, you gain 1 pound the next week, and it feels like, things are going backwards. But in reality, maybe you lost 2 pounds in the first week, but lost a pound of water, right? And then you gained 2 pounds of water back the next week, and you hadn't lost any fat that week, but you've still lost 3 pounds of fat over the course of those 2 weeks, right? Because your weight is going to fluctuate based on things other than actual bodily tissue. Water levels can fluctuate in the body. That can make significant changes on your scale weight, but that can hide progress on muscle growth or body fat loss. So that's where having other markers of progress, performance, how your clothes fit, pictures, measurements, sleep, energy levels, mood, tracking all those kind of things, or some of those things, can give you a more complete picture of how you're feeling and how you're changing.
Wow, I love it. Those are things that people rarely talk about. It's usually just the weight on the scale. Mm-hmm. So that's fantastic.
And I wish that wasn't the case, right? Because there's so much more to life than just, my body versus gravity.
Right, absolutely. So once those bases are covered in terms of applying those nutritional principles that you mentioned earlier, say that foundation is set and people want to get a little bit more benefit, are there any general health supplements that you recommend?
Yeah, to a degree. There's no supplement that's required, but there are some supplements that can be helpful or provide some convenience. I kind of already alluded to one with the super shakes, like some protein powder can be a really simple, convenient way to help you meet your protein needs, put together some nice, convenient meals. that allow you to do things like those super shakes. That can be really, really helpful, but that's certainly not required. But can be very, very convenient. Fish oil can be really beneficial, right? Generally, we recommend people are going to take fish oil to take about 1 to 2 grams or get about 1 to 2 grams of total EPA and DHA from their fish oil. That's usually about like 3 to 6 grams of total fish oil, but aiming for that 1 to 2 grams of EPA and DHA for heart benefit, joint benefit, eyes, brain. Omega-3s do a lot of beneficial things. Now, if you're consuming fatty fish, 2 or 3 times a week, there's not necessarily a need for taking fish oil. And then probably like a multivitamin, multimineral, really just to help make sure you don't have any nutrient deficiencies. Nutrient deficiencies are actually probably more common than I think people realize or is talked about, but they certainly do happen. So multivitamin, multimineral, a simple one, right? I'm not an advocate of ones that contain 6,000% of this vitamin and 4,000% of that vitamin. That can actually oftentimes cause more harm than benefit because of nutrient excess. So I generally like ones that give you about 100% of your needs, just as like nutritional insurance, just to help make sure you're filling any gaps and prevent any particular nutrient deficiencies. And one of the biggest ones being vitamin D. Right, I live in Maine, so I live in the Northeast, where it's virtually impossible for me to produce vitamin D from the sun this time of year. So I'm fortunate my multivitamin contains about 1,600 IUs of vitamin D, and I get my levels tested every year. If your multivitamin doesn't contain, let's say over 1,000, it might be worth considering supplementing, but it's probably something to discuss with your doctor, having your blood levels tested first. Generally, it's recommended to be in the 30 to 50 nanogram per milliliter range, but definitely, it always depends on your particular health circumstances, so probably something to discuss with your medical provider first, but that's one to consider as well.
Now, regarding that multivitamin, what are your thoughts on food-based multivitamins versus synthetic?
Yeah, it's a good question. Because there are some instances where some synthetic vitamins are actually better absorbed. Perfect example would be like folic acid, folate. The synthetic version is absorbed better, so you actually have to take less than like a food-based version. And there are some cases where food-based are better absorbed. So I'm not married to any one approach. I guess the best answer I can give is personally, I take a food-based one. But if someone's taking a synthetic one and it's kind of covering all their needs, it fits their budget, it doesn't have anything in excess, and it's a well-rated one, like it's covered by USP or Consumer Lab or some other independent third-party verification that says it has what it says it has and doesn't contain heavy metals and things like that, I don't see any real issue with it. I think sometimes we end up going down this fallacy of something that's natural has to be better. And that's generally true, but it's not always true. There are some naturally occurring compounds that can kill you. So I think it's important to kind of keep that perspective in mind and know that sometimes synthetic is better. Sometimes natural is better. If I really had to pick, if you forced me to pick one, I'd probably I would probably lean towards food-based, but I'm not married to it.
Okay, great. So tens of thousands of people from all walks of life have changed their lives with precision nutrition coaching. So I imagine that you have this huge database of information on what works and what doesn't, and you can start spotting some patterns. Are there any key findings that you didn't mention already today that you noticed?
I think one of the biggest things we've discovered over and over and over again is good nutrition is less about the food and more about the mindset. Right. So if you come into it with an open mind or a beginner's mind, right, you come into it with I'm going to start from the fundamentals and really hammer these down, rather than thinking, I already know all of that stuff. You might know it, but most people don't apply it consistently, right? Just because it's simple doesn't mean it's necessarily easy, or it's not easy right away. It becomes easier the more consistently you do it. And so I think what we've discovered more than anything else is helping people to kind of overcome that all or none mindset. If we're struggling to help you break from that, we find people tend to struggle getting good progress long term. If you can come in and have that open mindset and focus on mastering those fundamentals and not being discouraged by small setbacks or or even quote unquote failure, right? If you've seen The Last Jedi, if you're a Star Wars fan, you know that Yoda tells Luke, right, that failure is the greatest teacher. And it's the same thing with nutrition. Like, you're going to have days and times where you quote unquote fail. And that's just normal. That's called being human, right? It's part of the process. And so our most successful clients are ones that recognize they're going to trip and fall along the way. But what really matters is, okay, you get back up, you dust yourself off, and you keep going. It's just part of the process. And if you can come in and recognize that, you'll be far more successful than expecting yourself to never fail and to be perfect and berate yourself for when you do fail. If you have some self-compassion, you are 10 times more likely to be successful than making yourself feel guilty for the times you stumble and fall.
Right. Great advice. So as a final wrap-up question, do you have any last words of wisdom or anything you would like to leave our audience with?
I mean, I feel like I covered it pretty thoroughly with I don't want to keep belaboring the mindset point, but it really is that important. And I think it's often overlooked in discussions about nutrition because we all want to focus on the food, right? Well, what if I change up my macro percentage? Or what if I try this dietary strategy over that one? And sometimes that can be the answer. But more often than not, in my coaching experience and in the experience of the 50,000 plus people we've coached at PN and the 50,000 plus fitness professionals we've certified, in our collective experience, it's less about the food than it is how you think about the food, right? And how you feel and think about yourself. So I can't stress enough focusing on that aspect of it. Learning to be compassionate with yourself, recognize that you are human. You're going to have stumbles and falls, and that's just part of the learning process. And I think it's really important to kind of give yourself that buffer and allow yourself to have times when you aren't your best and you're not perfect, and that's okay. Because I think it can be too easy to fall back into that. Screw it, today sucked. I'm just going to eat all the cookies and I'll start fresh on Monday, because that approach almost never works. Whereas if you kind of like, you know what, I had a rough day. It is what it is. I'm going to pick back up tomorrow and get back to my usual approach. That's what works, regardless of what that actual approach is. So I think that's the key in recognizing that the alleged physiological superiority of keto or paleo or XYZ is far less important than your thought process around food.
Excellent. I love it, Brian. And if people want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
The best place to learn more about me is precisionnutrition.com. I write articles, I speak at conferences. I do a lot of different things of that nature for PN. So that would be the best place to find me, precisionnutrition.com for sure.
Brian, great stuff. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show and sharing all this amazing information. I've been following your work since your early days at Cressey Sports Performance, and you always put out amazing content. Thanks so much for coming on.
I appreciate it, Bill. Thanks for having me.
There it is. I hope you enjoyed that interview as much as I did. I just want to thank Brian again for sharing everything that he did. If you're interested in their coaching program, just head over to precisionnutrition.com and you can find everything there. I highly recommend it. If you want the show notes to this episode and access to my exclusive email list where I give my key takeaways from every episode, just head over to anchorsofhealth.com/14. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace.